Oscar Wilde famously said, "Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future." And if you look at the lives of the saints, this is the story. And I think of our patron here, St. Augustine. St. Augustine was raised by a saint, St. Monica, but she in her own life struggled with addiction. Augustine tells us in his Confessions that she used to go to the wine cellar and drink when she was a young girl, and substance abuse with alcohol. And she raised a son that she wanted to be a Christian and a man of God, but he didn't turn out that way at the beginning. He himself was addicted to sex. But their story, that's not the end of their story. God's mercy, God's love, God's hope was given to them. And we know them as St. Augustine and St. Monica. And so they're a wonderful story of addiction and recovery because of God's mercy. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a story about addiction, recovery, and hope. Hello, welcome to the Augustine Institute Show with Dr. Tim Gray. I'm Ben Akers filling in for him tonight. And tonight we're going to talk about a story about addiction and recovery and hope. My special guest tonight is the founder and CEO of Wall Street Productions. He's also the host of a podcast, a Bottom Line podcast. He's also the author of a book called The Big Hustle, a Boston Street kid's story of addiction and redemption. Please join me in welcoming Jim Wahlberg. Thanks for joining me, Jim.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben.
Yeah.
It's really great to be here.
Well, I really enjoyed your book, The Big Hustle. If someone's at home...
You're the one.
Was that? I'm
You're
the one who enjoyed it. I am
yes.
the one. I really did. I'd never heard of it before. I read it last night and today. And it was a page-turner, as Jim Caviezel, his forward says. This is like a thriller.
Right.
I want to get into your story about how it's a story of addiction and recovery and God's hope and mercy and God finding you in your life. But the first question I want to ask is, what made you want to write this book?
That's an interesting question. I think I kind of always thought that I would maybe someday write a book. In fact, there was talk with secular publishers about doing that, but I never really felt comfortable with that. I did get to feel comfortable when I decided to do it with the faith-based publisher. Right. I thought that my story is a story of redemption. It's a story of faith. It's a story of God's love and mercy. And I'm not sure how good that's going to go with a secular publisher.
Sure. Right.
So I think I found the right people, and we embarked on this journey together. And we're pretty happy with the way things turned out, I think.
Yeah, our Sunday Visitor is a wonderful apostolate.
Sure. Yeah.
They're a good partner and friends of the Augustine Institute. And so when I was reading this, if you had to sell this to Hollywood, who do you think would play you in the story?
Well, I think...
One of your brothers?
Here's the thing, is that, you know, it's a lot of this story is just a lost little boy, right? So it would have to be a number of people, right, from different age groups and different age brackets. We've actually talked about turning this into a film. So I really don't know. I don't know. I think maybe it would be, we would have to go out and discover a new talent for this.
I didn't know your story until I read your book, and it was a gripping, as I mentioned. How would you start your story? Where does your story start?
Well, I think my story starts in a 3-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, Massachusetts, one of 9 children, starved for attention, you know, lost, not really feeling like that I was being seen or heard, you know. There was a lot going on. There's a lot of craziness, and there was a lot of, my parents were very busy just trying to put food on the table. And so I was sort of searching for attention, and I was looking for it in all the wrong places, you know. I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old. I had my first drink on that little dead-end street in that 3-bedroom apartment, hanging out with some older kids in the neighborhood. And I wasn't so much after the alcohol as much as I was after their acceptance and their attention, right? And I got that. So I had a drink or a couple of drinks. Nothing really happened. I didn't have any real physical reaction. I wasn't really drunk or anything, but I think I was drunk on they're paying attention to me, and me sort of, I mattered to somebody. I was able to be funny. I was whatever it was. And so I became really aware of that more than anything else, I think.
Is that a common story? I know you work with opioid addiction and families that have struggled with that. Is that a common story about someone being starved for attention and they try to distract themselves?
So I think for me, in the way I look at addiction in general, right, I think there are different paths to addiction. I think that my path was more of a traditional path to addiction, if that means something. I think, it started out, with a drink, a cigarette, and it progressed on to much more dangerous drugs. And the opioid epidemic is something different because a lot of these young people are starting with the most dangerous drugs known to man. And a lot of these young people started with a prescription from a doctor, right? And these young people were on the fast track for success. They never exhibited any sort of addictive nature. They never really got in trouble. It wasn't that kind of a journey for them. It was a trusted person in the community with a white jacket and a stethoscope and an education and a diploma handed them a little piece of paper and said, "I'll take the pain away for you," right? And they gave them drugs that they claim that less than 1% of the people who took them became addicted. But the truth of the matter is like 90% of the people that took them became addicted.
Oh, that's terrible. With your story of addiction, it seems quickly to juvenile delinquency, to prison even.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not what your parents had hoped for you.
Yeah, I mean, so I started out, from as far back as I can remember, I was always into something. From kindergarten was the first time I played hooky in school. And so, I made it to the 7th grade. And from kindergarten, or from the 1st grade to the 7th grade, I went to 7 different schools. I was a product of the integration of the Boston public school system. And so instead of going to the school that was around the corner from my house, I got put on a bus and sent to a school in somebody else's neighborhood. And they got put on a bus and sent to the school next to my house. And so every year I went to a different school. And so every year I had to readjust every year. And so I sought out the kids that were a little edgy. I sought out trouble. I had to find attention. I had to reestablish myself every year. And so, I started drinking and smoking and doing different kinds of drugs, at least recreationally in the beginning, probably, by the time I was 11. I think I went to the 7th grade. I completed the 7th grade. I went to the Martin Luther King School in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And I remember at the end of the year, the principal saying to me, have a great summer. Please let your parents know that we probably don't want you to come back here next year. You'll go somewhere else. Because I was trouble. So the last day of school was a Friday. I went home and I started to make plans for my first night of the summer. And I remember we were getting ready to go out. Dinner was 5 o'clock every night in my house. And so we ate dinner very quickly, and I couldn't wait to get out the door because I knew all my friends, other 12-year-old kids, we were going to drink beer, we were going to smoke cigarettes, we were going to do things that we were not supposed to do, and we were going to act like we were older and more mature than we were. And I remember as I was going out the door, my father reminded me, now don't forget, you be in this house by the time those streetlights come on, or don't come home, right? Now, that sounds harsh, but you got to remember, there was 12 years of history before that day that I had already run away from home and been in trouble and things like that. And I went out that Friday night, and I remember those streetlights coming on, and I remember making the decision that I couldn't, it was too important for me to be right here with these people with that drink in my hand than it was for me to go home, right, and be safe in my own bed. And I didn't go home. That was June, 20th. School ends around that time in Boston. I didn't go home till August.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't go home till August, and by that time, my dad was beyond going out looking for me, and I was never more than a mile, a quarter of a mile, half a mile from my house, right down on the corner. And some nights I would stay with friends, and then some nights I would have nowhere to go, and I would sleep outside, and I would, in my daily shower, if you will, would be at the Quincy Quarries. We would go swimming, and I'd jump in the water, and that's how I would wash up. Yeah.
Well, if you're watching and we'll have a question for Jim Wahlberg about his story and about addiction, recovery, and I invite you to text in or call. It's 720. It's 660. And the last 0100. So 720-650-0100. You can also comment on the formed text line underneath as well. Jim, so that was your summer of your 12th year of life, and then you end up in prison.
Right. So I get addicted. I get committed to the Department of Youth Services. So that means that the state is now making the decisions about my life. My parents were no longer making the decisions. And to be honest with you, their hands were up in the air. They were okay with that because I was completely out of control. And my dad comes from a generation, he had a job when he was 12 years old. Right. He was helping to provide for a family at 12. So he didn't look at me as a little kid, And so the state was making the decisions. And, it was a series of, I would get in trouble, I would get locked up, and instead of, after a period of time of being locked up, they wouldn't send me home, they would send me to foster care or to a group home. And so, getting sent to live in somebody else's home, right? There were many times that, somebody would come and pick me up at one of these locked facilities, and, usually like a case manager or a counselor that I would know already, and they would drive me to some suburban neighborhood and drop me off at some person's house. And I would be back in Boston before they were. And they had a car, because I was just so drawn to the street and so drawn to, I always felt like I was missing something, like something was going on, and having had the experience of, sleeping outside and living outside in the cold. I'm from Boston. And being home and being safe in my house, and then that thought would come to me, that obsession would come to me, that like I was missing something. So it wasn't, the obsession wasn't to run out and use drugs and alcohol. It was something's going on and I'm missing it, right? That attention that I was seeking all the time. And so I would climb out the window of my house and run down to the corner, and many times there was nobody there. And now I couldn't get back in the house. Right? So it was, I would consume alcohol to sort of soothe that pain and that loneliness and the shame of, living in the streets.
Right. I know that millennials today will talk about FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Like it feels like something's going on and I've not been invited, or I want to be invited, I want to be part of it and not miss anything.
Sure, that's a real thing. And it was, what was the song? I was looking for love in all the wrong places. I was looking for attention in all the wrong places. And, my life became a series of, I was either getting in trouble because I was under the influence doing things I wasn't supposed to do, or I would get in trouble because I was trying to get the money to get under the influence. And so, I was in juvenile detention. Life happens like this, right? Next thing you know, I'm 17 years old. In Massachusetts, 17, you are an adult as far as the criminal justice system is concerned. You can't go to the liquor store and buy drinks, but you can go to state prison. And I committed crimes that would bring me to state prison at 17 years old. And things that I barely remember, and I ended up 17 years old. I got a 3 to 5 year prison sentence in Walpole State Prison, which is it's a maximum security state prison. I shouldn't have been in that sort of setting the entire time. I should have went and did my time and behaved myself, but that need for attention and that need for acceptance consumed me even in prison. And so I was in prison and I should have been out in 2 years, but because of that need for that attention, I turned that into 5 years. And I did 5 years, and it came time for me to get out, and I was essentially, I was a crazy person at that point, right? I understood prison. I didn't understand the world anymore because it had passed me by. And I get out, and the first thing I did was pick up a drink because I needed something to soothe that fear that I was consumed in. And, you know, I was out 6 months. And for that 6 months, I consumed as much alcohol and as much drugs as I could get in my body. And then 6 months, almost to the day later, I found myself in a police station, covered with blood, and had no idea why I was there. And I come to find out that I had robbed a Boston police officer's house. And he came home in the middle of the night while I was in his house. And that blood that was all over me was my blood. And I was back in prison. You know, there was a guy who I was in prison with who was a young guy who got caught up and ended up, he got like 40 years. And he was the last person I saw on the way out from doing 5 years. And he was the first person I saw when I came back. He was so angry.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was motivated when I came back. I didn't want to do 9 years. That was my motivation, right? Because if I did 9 years, I would be over 30 when I got out. And that's prehistoric, right? When you're a kid, that's prehistoric. So I started to do things to try to create an illusion that I was becoming rehabilitated. I started going to self-help groups. I started going to 12-step groups. I started going to therapy, all to create an illusion. It was completely, I was running a game. I just wanted to get out.
That's what I was wondering, because you call the book The Big Hustle.
Yeah, and I was,
and
that was
you were
awesome.
a hustler going in, and you're still trying to hustle in prison.
And I'm in, and I'm hustling, and the priest, Father Jim Freitas at MCI Concord, took notice of the fact that I was doing all these things, and I'm not sure he looked at me like I was, I think he's a priest. He probably thought, hey, this kid's trying to get his life together. And so he approaches me and offers me a job as the custodian in the chapel. And I instantly think, because this is the way my mind worked, oh, this guy smokes cigarettes. He's got coffee. He's got a phone in there. He's got a quiet place to just sit, because there are no quiet places in prison to just sit and to just be alone and be in privacy.
Are you Catholic? Are you practicing Catholic at this time?
I'm not a practicing Catholic at this time. I was baptized. I made my first Holy Communion. I had never made my confirmation. Okay. And I grew up in a tradition, not in a faith.
Sure.
Right? I grew up, and this is what we do. This is what the neighbors do. You're going to put that little white suit on. You're going to go to make your first Holy Communion. We're going to have a party. Yep. But no talk of a loving God. No talk of Jesus dying for me. No, none of that. Right? And so I would go to church, and I just felt like I felt everywhere else, like I didn't belong, and that I wasn't good enough, and that everybody else there thought they were better than me.
Jim, one of the things that happens in prison, because you're trying to hustle the priest to maybe get cigarettes, a quiet place, a phone call, is you end up getting hustled by him.
He's the hustler.
Can you tell that story? Yeah.
He's the hustler. I mean, it wasn't right away. Probably after the first week, he says to me, hey, listen, you know, I need the chapel cleaned for Sunday. So why don't you come to the Vigil Mass on Saturday, then you can clean afterwards, because it's too complicated getting you out. Like that's a time when they let people out. So why don't you do that? So I said, okay. And I remember I would sit in the pew, and I would sit next to a guy who was a very dangerous criminal. He was a very, very devout Catholic guy, but he was a very dangerous guy. He was a bank robber. He's a serious guy. And I remember sitting next to him, and I didn't know any of the prayers. I didn't know any of the responses. I just watched him, you know, and I just kind of learned from him. And, but, you know, Father Freitas, he was the hustler, right? So his goal was simple. His goal was to get me to the foot of the cross. He was trying to bring me back in the fold, right? And to maybe expose me to this loving, merciful God that is the God that we believe in, right? That our faith is grounded in. And I remember he said to me after a couple of weeks of working, he said, hey, we have a very special guest coming next week. And I was like, really, Father, who's that? And he said, Mother Teresa is coming to this prison. And I said, that's amazing, Father. Who's Mother Teresa? Because the extent of my life was, where was my next drink and drug coming from? It was not, I probably didn't know who the President of the United States was, to be honest, at that time in my life, right? And so, you know, a week or two later, here she is. And I remember seeing her. I remember seeing her walking through the quad of this prison, and I remember she was surrounded by all of these important people.
And she's just a short little woman that's kind of, yeah.
A little teeny thing, but I can't really tell from that far away. But as she gets closer, I see the governor, the warden, all these people in suits, and as they get closer and I get closer to them, I'm keenly aware of her. And I'm keenly aware of a few things. Her sweater looked like it was 1,000 years old. And her pockets were full of money, cash, which
that people were just giving to her.
People,
for her
you know,
work.
that's what people did,
Yeah.
and because they knew what she would do with those dollars,
she would use it well.
She would use it well,
Yeah.
And then I looked at her feet, you know, and I looked at those sandals, and I was like, I mean, they also look like they're 1,000 years old. And then because I worked in the chapel, I was part of the procession for the Mass. And the Cardinal was there, and there was lots of dignitaries there, and they had set up the gymnasium for the Mass, and there was a stage. And I remember the Cardinal had a big fancy chair, and next to him he had another big fancy chair for Mother Teresa, but she humbly refused. Instead, she stayed there on the floor with the sisters from her order. And I remembered looking over, and for the first time in my life, I saw true humility.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll be honest with you, looking at her face, I felt like I was looking at the face of God. I didn't know, like I just didn't, it was just, I knew I was in the presence of holiness, but I couldn't explain it to myself.
Yeah.
And then she got up and she spoke. And when she spoke, I honestly felt like she was speaking directly to me.
What was her message?
Her message was real simple, but they were words that I never heard before. That I was a child of God, that Jesus Christ died for me. Personally, specifically, he died for me. And that I was more than the crimes that I had committed. And that I was more than my prison number. I was a child of God. And I never heard anything like that. I was completely blown away. And I remember just kind of floating through the rest of the day, and she left, and she visited other prisons in the state. And I remember running back to the chapel the next day to talk to Father Freitas and telling him that I needed to know more about this Jesus that she was talking about and this God that she was talking about, because I never heard about that God.
Yeah.
I heard about God's going to get you,
Yeah.
right? For the bad that you have done, God is going to get you. And so literally that day, I started the preparations to make my confirmation.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I know in the story that you'll go through a process of learning more about Jesus, more about the faith,
Yep.
getting confirmed.
Yep.
But a question came in that I want to,
Sure.
I think, for our viewers at home. Dawn asks, what guidance is there for spouses of addicted individuals that don't believe there is a problem?
So the number one thing I want to say to anybody that is either love somebody who's addicted or is addicted, right? That nothing is too big for God. I can remember feeling that I wasn't worthy, right? I was going to these meetings, these 12-step groups, and I was thinking, this is amazing for them, but I'm not worthy of this, right? So I want to say that nothing's too big for God, right? Never, ever give up. And prayer is critical, right? But also the truth. The truth is critical. You know, we can't live in the darkness. We can't live in secrecy. And addiction is just that. Addiction is, it's isolation, it's separation, it's brokenness, it's sin, it's all these things, right? And recovery is the exact opposite. It's love, it's community, it's friendship, it's faith. It's all of those things. So telling the truth and to somebody you love is necessary, I think, right? And, you know, it's a scary time, right? With so many people that have died from addiction, it's such a scary time. But we need to be bold. We need to be bold. We need to let people know how much we love them and that we know that God can restore them, right? And, I don't want to be cheesy and recommend my book, but it is is a book that sort of takes you through that mercy and that love that God has for us, right? That I certainly didn't think I was worthy of it.
That's related to the next question that Ryan asks. Did you, when you were first talking, it sounded like God was a distant God, the cosmic cop who's going to pull you over, give you a ticket, send you to hell. What's your relationship now with Jesus and the church? Are you Catholic? I
am very Catholic. I'm an active participant in my faith. Prayed the rosary today with my brother Chris Stefanik driving up the mountain in Denver. Yeah, I'm Catholic, and I belong to a Catholic men in recovery group as well. And we do that virtually, and we have people from all over the world really join us. And it's just, you know, we claim Jesus Christ, right, as the power that people talk about. You need a power greater than yourself. Right. There is no greater power for me than the power of Jesus Christ, right? And so, yeah, I rely on that completely. That's beautiful. So you say you claim Jesus Christ, but first and foremost, he claimed you. Amen. And that's exactly what, when I read your story, I get the sense of the Good Shepherd story from the scriptures, where he leaves the 99 that goes after the one. And I just saw, you know, all the darkness that you experienced in your life, that you shared at the beginning of your life, in prison, in solitary confinement for many years in the prison, that the Lord still was looking for you, and he found you. And I'm really grateful for you sharing that. You know, I once asked, in a moment of real emotion, I asked a priest, why me? Like, all the people that I know that were there that day that Mother Teresa was there, and all the people that I spent all these years in prison with that are still there or been in and out or dead, or why me? And he said, why not you? You're a child of God, right? And I don't know, man, I know that for me, that I had almost like a white light experience that day with Mother Teresa, right? And I walked away from that. Over the course of those years, I came out of prison in the middle of the biggest scandal the church had ever faced, in Boston, Ground Zero in Boston, and I was being given permission that I didn't have to believe in the faith of my childhood, or I could create my own conception of God, which for me is a dangerous thing, for me. Right? I won't speak for anybody else, but for me, that's a dangerous thing. And so after having that experience and having that sort of melting of my heart and falling in love with Jesus, I walked away from that. And I'll tell you, when you walk away from that, the feeling of doom comes back pretty quickly. So I was able to not use the drink or not use drugs, and I was able to get married and have children and buy a home, and for all outward sake, I was a successful person, right? But I was lost and lonely again. I was sad and empty again, right? And I knew that there was only one thing that was going to fill that emptiness, right? And so I was at a jumping off point, and my wife had sort of a profound conversion, or reversion, I prefer to call it. She went on a retreat, and I mean, she got knocked to her knees, and she came home, and instead of doing what my wife would normally do, which is, you are going to church, we are going to church, and that's the way it's going to be, she just was kinder and more gentle, and it became attractive to me. And then she tried to get me finally to go on a retreat. And I said, no, I'm good. I have the God of my own understanding. I'm all set. Meanwhile, I'm dying inside. And so my daughter came to see me. She was 12 years old. And she said, my daughter Kyra, who's an amazing woman of God, came to me and said, Daddy, I want you to go on this retreat. I want you to be happy. I want you to know Jesus. And she literally ripped the mask right off my face. I thought I had them all fooled, that I was happy, that I was this great, happy, wonderful guy who was helping all these people around me that were suffering from addiction and all this stuff. And the truth of the matter is that I was sad and lonely, right? And I was drifting further and further away. And I was a man that, what kind of man drives their family to church and drops them off? that's where I was. I went from this amazing white light experience, seeing what I thought was the face of God, to dropping my family off in church and going home and watching football and coming back to pick them up. And it is one of those things that still, it hurts me, right?
Yeah.
But I know the devil is strong, man.
Jim, thank you for your story. I want to leave that as a cliffhanger because we're out of time. But yours is a story of, of being open to God's will. And I see the Lord at different conversion moments of your life. And that's the story of every Christian that really is honest and trying to follow Jesus. We have those mountaintop experiences, but we also have those tough valley experiences. So thank you for your willingness to share the story and come on the show and meet with me. If you're interested in learning more and hear the rest of the story, it is a great story. The Big Hustle by Jim Wahlberg, a Boston street kid's story of addiction and redemption. Thank you for joining us tonight. Next week, Dr. Gray will welcome me as the guest, where we actually go through question and answers. So send in your questions about the faith and how to keep your kids Catholic, and be happy to see you next week.